There was something very unique when I arrived on set on day one. The first scene was walking down the corridor, and it was pitch black. When I arrived, and I mean, it was so dark, and Tobias was like, and I was like, is it gonna look like this? And then he showed me the take, and I think the apertures were open, but it gave this grainy effect. Now that stayed throughout a lot of the film, and I found it unbelievably freeing because you didn't feel the consciousness of the whole crew next to you. Often you were shooting these scenes in real darkness in which you could, barely see the actor you're playing with, just enough to catch the eyes. I found it very freeing because it was the closest to real life I've ever felt. You didn't feel the invasion of the camera crew, really.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about work.
Is it because what they're saying is true?
Eddie and Jessica, you're playing real people, and I wonder, what kind of research did you do?
We started with the book. I spoke to Amy Lochran, which was invaluable to me. And then I researched what the physicality of what she struggled with, the cardiomyopathy, and what that would do to her body and her breathing and her heart. And then we went to nursing school. So it just became second nature to us. There's so much in the film of us giving IVs and switching out saline bags. I never wanted anything to look like an actor is pretending to do it. I just wanted it to look like as simple as walking down a hallway.
I mean, not dissimilar, starting with Charlie Graeber's book, which was a kind of Bible, I suppose. It was an amazing resource because it had a huge amount of Charlie's biography, his upbringing, a lot of the damage that he had lived with that you don't see in the movie, but that informs a lot of who he is. For me, I then worked with a brilliant dialect coach called Michael Buster. I know that came with. And there's a wonderful woman called Alexandra Reynolds, who is a dancer who I worked with first on Theory of Everything. She and I looked at lots of video footage of Charlie, and we played together. The weird thing about acting in film is often a lot is done in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. You do it sort of beforehand, and I find it very useful to have someone before we start rehearsals that you can have a sort of sounding board with, in both a physical and an emotional place. So that was helpful. And then we did the three of us.
2 weeks of rehearsal, right?
Yeah, which was just wonderful because
you guys got to rehearse.
It was COVID times. We weren't allowed more than 3 people in a room.
Is that a fairly long amount of rehearsal? I mean, are you usually given that kind of opportunity to work things out?
I mean, I ask for a lot of rehearsal. If I'm doing a special skill, like changing IVs, something I've never done before, I absolutely talked to the director about wanting it. But I knew, working with Tobias, that it would be something that was important to him too, which is probably the reason why I wanted to do the film. We all very much had a very similar way of working.
Tobias and Christy, the film doesn't really explain why Cullen did what he did. What went into that creative decision?
I think it's pretty simple. And it comes with the responsibility of telling these stories is we don't know. So I can see why a plot would be, it would be tempting to make up a reason or try to explain it. But the thing is, I don't know if the black and white explanation is there. And also, we were never really fascinated with Charlie as the focus, as the center of the story. We were much more fascinated with Jessica, with Amy, and what she did, and how she, as one single person, stood up against the most prolific serial killer, but also a system that didn't stop him. That was our fascination point. And basically, from when we started to talk, first it became about getting rid of all those tempting, small, fascinating, scenes or small pieces of flesh that we could, sit there and chew on, and instead focus it in on how can we identify with this true hero. And still be honest in our critical eye on a system that didn't stop him. So that was it. True crime in itself is not an art form. It's kind of lost in the darkness because it's focused on true crime is obsessed with the crime itself. it's our responsibility to find a reason to tell that story. And that reason needs to be connected to humanity. And that was Amy in this story.
You know, the film also sort of indicts the healthcare system. I mean, was that something that you wanted to explore, or the bureaucracies that have kind of sprung up around it?
I mean, I come from the UK where we have socialised healthcare, and whilst I wouldn't say that we wouldn't have nurses that do this, I don't believe we would have a nurse that would continue this long. I think the system allowed Charlie to move from hospital to hospital. And so that was fascinating to me because, you know, like Tobias says, you have to try and tell the real honest story behind this. And the real honest story is that, yes, there was a very evil man that did things, but also there was a system that incubated it. And then, you know, there was a woman who stood alone against all of that to stop him. I mean, to me, you have to tell that story as truthful.
Kim, you are kind of the personification of that system. I mean, how did you approach that role?
Tobias and I spoke about it, and I think the only way into it was kind of through her humanity and defending her and sort of, you know, trying to embody this person who's probably was a nurse and worked her way up to this position and as risk manager. And I don't think in her wildest dreams she would have ever imagined she would have come upon this. And, you know, in that position, she had, you know, bosses, and there was legal that was telling her what to do. And then once she was 10 steps into her protocol, and then before she knew it, she was knee deep in the water, you know. And it's we also spoke about, like, you know, capturing the humanity of her, but also like, how do you show doubt and compromise and struggle without showing it? You know, so I just tried to keep her relatable, and, you know, what would any of us do? So you look at this picture and you hope you can be this, you look at this movie, you hope you can be what Amy Lochran was, you know, but we might find ourselves in these positions that aren't that easy to maneuver.
There's also these great scenes with the police officers, and I wonder, how did you both approach that work, and what kind of research did you do too?
Well, I'm not kidding, but Noah said that he plays a detective in every film. So he was my research, basically. He would tell me what to do, and no, they don't write like that. Or, you know, that sort of stuff. So I appreciate that. For me, again, it started with the book, like it did for, I think, everybody else, and just really diving in. But when I met Danny, the real guy, I think that's what changed it for me. But that was the end of the shoot, which was a little late, but you know, I was happy to meet him. But I think on top of the doors being closed because he was a detective, I think being a Black man in that situation in the early 2000s, I think he went through as many doors closing with the hospital system as he did with his own job, which I think was it was very difficult for him, but it helped me sort of in that last stretch find sort of the inner core of him and what really drove him.
These detectives were stumped. They kept hitting a brick wall. The system failed them. And what happened for these detectives is they found Amy, a single human being who was able to change their ability to catch this guy. They were thwarted by the system at every turn, and they were so frustrated and they were so angry. And then along came this angel, and I think that relates to the story as a whole. That, you know, systemically things can fail, especially right now in our culture. What's happening? Systems seem to be failing, but systems are made up of human beings, you know. And the single human being within the system has the potential to be more morally conscious, have more integrity, have more determination, have more commitment to truth than the system as a whole. And we need to kind of figure this out as a culture now. But systemic immutability is problematic, and this lost some of its connection to humanity, which is what it's meant to be taken care of in the first place. So we need to go back to the seeds of these systems, a single human being, and realize each other's humanity and relate to each other relatively in that way. And I thought that was an interesting dynamic that these police officers encountered and grew through. I thought that made it particularly resonant and relevant to now.
Tobias, I wonder, visually, it's a very naturalistic looking film, and were there films that you looked to when it came to kind of creating the look of The Good Nurse?
Definitely. I think, from Northern Europe, where I come from, social realism is a thing. But the thing with social realism is that it's kind of political. It's a political statement showing a social struggle. I wanted to lean much more into naturalism and try to find a way where we don't try to seduce with fascinating settings or great colors or fascinating impressive camera movements, but just try to be present and be with these people as they lived this life that we were portraying. The whole thing about systems became a way to build this film. We tried to put as many grids, as many vertical and straight lines as possible in there, so we could feel how these people were constantly walking through doors, through small spaces and rooms, or were caught in boxes. And so would the camera movement do. And then, since it's night nurses, it was a challenge to find a way how we could still make it colorful and alive and be true to what darkness does to the human eye. For two factors. One, of course, that there is like literally darkness at the night, but also the darkness that we invited the audience into. We wanted everybody to make an effort to search a bit more as we look on the screen instead of just having everything served. And that was something that Jody Lee Lipes, the DP, who has done wonderful work before, he did a tremendous work on finding the balance between very strict camera work and just keeping it alive and being present.